When I was around 4 or 5, my mom was helping a friend of hers move things out of an old mill. I didn't have to go to school and there was no one to watch me, so I had to go with her. When we got to the mill, my mom's friend greeted us with a little boy hiding behind her, which I assumed was her kid at the time. He walked off and I didn't see him for a while after that. Some time after being there, I noticed it was particularly cold, considering it was mid-June. I noticed there would be strange noises every now and then that would startle not only me, but my mom and her friend as well. Things would fall over with nothing to knock them down, and it was all freaking me out, but I didn't tell my mom I was scared. I just kept playing. After a few hours of being there, I saw the boy again hiding behind a wooden beam. When I went over to say hello, he disappeared. I brushed it off, thinking it was a figment of my imagination. It was getting late and I was scared out of my mind because it had gotten fairly dark in the mill, so my mom decided it was time to go. While my mom was holding me and saying goodbye to her friend, I was looking around, and in the corner there was the little boy. I remember the feeling of absolute dread washing over me. I tugged at my mom's shirt to get her attention. "Mommy, who's the little boy in the blue shirt standing in the corner?" I asked, shaking. Mom looked at me with wide eyes, her friend looking over in the corner as well. "There's no one there," my mom said. Her friend gulped and brought us out to the mill, leaving the boy behind. I've not returned to that mill to this day, but sometimes I still see the little boy, and it's been at least 10 years. Let me tell you about my childhood boogeyman. When I was a little girl, I lived in an old farmhouse in the country. Once a night, I would wake up in the AM to go downstairs to use the bathroom. I would have to make a left turn to get there. Before I made the turn, I would be facing a wall that had a window that was higher up, which was an oddity of an old house and its layout. Somehow, I started to imagine a monster peeking in at me through the window. He was a gangly white humanoid, but had no ears, hair, or a nose. He had huge black eyes and would always grin at me with giant sharp teeth as he pressed long clawed hands to the glass beside his head. I was terrified that if I looked at him too long, he would rush around the side of the house to the back door, break in, and hurt me. So while I glimpsed him, I rushed myself to avoid looking at him more. "He's not real," I would tell myself. As I got older, I stopped imagining him so vividly, but he persisted under specific circumstances. When it was a dark night and I was near the ground floor window, I would have flashes of the white boogeyman peering in at me. "He's not real," I told myself, but I averted my eyes as soon as I would close the curtains. On especially quiet nights, I would dread looking out my window at distant streetlights in case he is there, hunched over and waiting for me to look at him to signal the hunt. "He isn't real," I scolded myself, forcing myself to look up to prove it, as my stomach dropped as I did it. It's worse when it's windy outside, and I mistake the shaking of trees and bushes for his movements. My mind is convinced that he lurks among the shaking branches, quietly wandering among them as he circles my building, looking for the perfect window to surprise me from. I hate his huge, sharp-toothed grin and his needle-thin claws. I hate that my imagination remembers him and the fear so vividly. So I keep the curtains drawn, fill the night with lights and noises from games in my phone, and remind myself whenever the nighttime paranoia grows, he isn't real. He isn't real. He isn't real. The college I go to is known for being haunted. It's 140 years old, and the majority of the original buildings are still being used. During my freshman year, I stayed in one of the oldest buildings that is around 130 years old. From the very first night in August until about late September or October, I would get out of bed at around 4 or 5 a.m. and stand at the foot of my roommate's bed and stare at her until she woke up. I did this every day. I had no recollection of this happening, and I don't have a history of sleepwalking or sleep talking. Another thing is, I would often hear tapping. Things would touch me or pull at my pant leg, doors would shut, etc. Once my roommate and I moved to a different room down the hall, the sleepwalking stopped. However, whenever we would shower, we would often hear knocking on the bedroom door or banging coming from the other room. When we would come out, no one else would be in the room, or my roommate would say that she hadn't left her bed since I had gotten in the shower. Keep in mind, the shower thing would happen to both of us. On another occasion, I was out of town visiting a friend. My roommate was at the dorm alone, and it was spring break, so she was likely the only person in the building. When she got out of the shower, she said that all of my string lights were on. I kept them off most of the time because they ran on batteries and I wanted to conserve them. She texted me asking if I could come back early because she was scared. Those are all of the stories that I remember that happened in that building. But I know that there are more. I have just lost track of them. This happened in the winter of 2017. It was my friend Isaiah's birthday, so we all went to his house to hang out and act like a bunch of morons for 5 hours. It was going to be a fun day for all we knew. It was normal Ohio weather out, gray skies, about 50 degrees. We were all having fun and telling stupid jokes when Isaiah said, "You guys want to go for a walk?" We were all pretty bored, so we agreed. The first sign that we were in the wrong was that there was a gate in front of the woods. It had a sign on it that read, "Do not enter private property," with the name of some church on it. We were young and stupid, so we thought nothing of it. Hell, I don't even think the others read it. We walked for about a half hour before we found an area different than the rest of the forest. It was like a graveyard, but different. The graves were long, skinny cylinders marked with 10-digit numbers rather than names. It was wrong. These people had no identity other than a number. It unsettled me, and I started to understand why it was gated off, but it wasn't something you'd associate with a church. Whatever this organization was, it wasn't holy. Considering the neighborhood we were in, it wasn't outlandish. There was a house there with a cross out front with a bloody cloth and a deer skull affixed to it, along with a shed out back lit with candles at night. I suggested that we should go back multiple times, but I was ignored and we just kept walking. Later on, we found another grave, singled out and hidden in the woods. It was different. It looked unfinished. The grave was lopsided and there was a decomposing hand sticking out of the ground. It was odd because it looked like someone visited it often. Flowers were placed at it, and there was a picture of a family that looked like it was from the 1950s. One of us threw up at the sight of the hand, and the rest of us were unsettled and nauseous. We all decided it was time to go back to the house. When we got back, we started a fire, and we were having a good time. We had forgotten about the whole thing until about 2 hours later. It was dark, maybe 8 o'clock. We were getting tired, so maybe this was all a dream. Or a hallucination. I don't know, but I remember it so vividly. I got a phone call. Naturally, my friend sighed in annoyance at my stupid ringtone back then. I looked at the number and it wasn't from around the area. I didn't recognize the code, and then I realized it and froze. It was the number on the isolated grave. Once everyone realized it too, I answered it and put it on speakerphone. We listened in horror to the sounds of hell that the phone produced. I couldn't make anything out other than the words, "It can't be real." I hung up and I couldn't remember anything that happened until I got home. The next morning I looked at my call list. The number wasn't there. It showed no activity from the previous day. I dialed the number and it came up non-existent, which is why I don't know if it really happened. Nevertheless, It scared the hell out of me.